31. Cal. Everything ached. Cal could feel the grind of his joints as he tried to move his arms and legs. They felt stiff, unused. He lay on soft blankets with something hard underneath. A bed. An old bed. The frame creaked beneath him as he tried and failed to sit up. The smell of ash-cracked wood and moth-eaten sheets filled his nose. The details of the room swam into place as he blinked open his eyes. A damp cloth pressed against his forehead, the cool water trickling down his skin, a welcome sensation against the ambient heat of the room. A familiar heat, one he'd forgotten. Welcome back, Cal. A breeze carried the scent of smelt and iron through a gaping hole in the wall. The clang of hammers on steel echoed from somewhere below. There was a rawness in his chest, not from pain or muscle ache, but a sudden sense of longing for a place he'd never thought he'd return to. Igni. Try not to move so quickly, the voice said. Familiar, full of light and warmth. Someone who cared about him. Someone he cared about. You've been gone a while. The damp cloth dabbed against his cheek and the side of his throat. Do you want to get up? "Y- Yeah. He let gentle hands guide him upright. Movement felt good. Life flooded back into him as he bent limbs and flexed fingers. His eyes traced the hand on his chest, following the streaks of ivory white that arced like lightning through the skin. Up a slender arm to shoulders that cradled messy strands of stark white hair, the ends frizzled in the heat. Piercing blue eyes traced the outline of his figure, giving him a once-over, though Cal suspected this wasn't the first time she'd attended to him. "Ovette," he said, his voice coarse. "You're okay." She chuckled, enough to break her concentration. "Yes, Cal, I'm fine." "We're in Igni?" "Yes," she replied, staring off to the side. "We're home." Recognition set in as he took in the room. A table with blackened edges sat in the middle of a small space, surrounded by several mismatched cushions and pillows, many of them blackened and crusted. Metal scraps shone with a dull glint through holes in a straw-hewn sack. And through the broken wall, Igni's breath stood tall and proud, its mouth alive with the deep glow of molten orange. Signs of destruction pockmarked what remained of the walls. But despite this, the familiar bric-a-brac around him and even the sight of Igni's breath further kindled warmth in his chest. At least, until he moved his gaze beyond the volcano. Until he saw them. Chains, some thick and monstrous, others thinner, but no less imposing. Dozens of them speared the earth and vanished into the clouds above. Panic pushed Cal out of bed. His neglected muscles toppled him to the floor, but he crawled and struggled to the doorway, to the door that led out into the outer walkway. The new chains dominated every direction, close enough to cast a glow on the outer walls of the city, and far enough away to be partially obscured by distance. And on each of them, cliffs flared with constant presence. Vibrant, aggressive. They started appearing not long after we left Valewind. Ovette joined him on the walkway. Honestly, it's pure luck we even made it out of there in one piece. She placed her hand on the small of his back to help him maintain his shaky balance. When he turned to her, hoping she'd have answers for him, she only smiled. You're a lot heavier than you look. Jord? Artie? Have you seen them? Talk to them? The questions fired out of him one after the other, each with answers he already knew. Ovette dipped her head, her smile fading away. It was obvious. They weren't here. Shay's face flashed through his mind. It reopened a wound that being asleep had allowed him to forget. His hands trembled as he slid the dagger, his dagger, out of her stomach. Her smile as she told him everything was going to be okay. He gasped for breath, the weakness in his chest tying itself into a knot. His body didn't have the strength to weep, but the tears burned behind his eyes all the same. He allowed Ovette to lead him back inside, sat still as she took the damp cloth and wiped away the soot that had collected across his cheeks and torso. A vain effort, with the city next to a volcano, but he appreciated the effort. She gestured to a set of clothes in the corner. They're clean, or as clean as I could get them. Thanks. Cal gulped in response. He swallowed against the lump in his throat, and, for the first time since he'd awoken, he noted the groan in his empty stomach. Ovette must have noticed it too. Get dressed, and we'll go get something to eat. I've done what I can for your body, but some food will do you a world of good. Besides, I need to check on Leif. Leif? His head throbbed with sudden alertness. He'd have pushed himself off the bed again, but a sudden surge of dizziness kept him seated. He's here? It took Ovette a moment to respond, but her smile returned. He's at the orphanage, or what's left of it. Bogdan was looking after him for a time, but since we're back. She trailed off and turned away from him, but not before he caught the glimmer in her eye. He'll be pleased to see you. Wait, Cal said, grabbing her wrist. How long was I? He gestured with his head toward the bed. Ovette sighed before turning to answer. 6 months. Her tone was flat and devoid of emotion. 6 months? Get dressed, Cal. We need to go see Leif. Dressing took more effort than he would have liked to admit. His joints protested, and his mind reeled at the thought of half a year lost. The corruption that had marred his skin for so long had now faded to dull scars. It didn't writhe under the surface anymore, though the discoloration of his skin remained. It would seem the dread no longer had a use for him. Unwanted and forgotten. Now he truly felt like he was home. Cal's dagger and the hilt of Leif's shattered sword lay beneath the final item of clothing. He reached out for the hilt, the blade little more than a single sliver of metal. Ovette stayed silent as he stared at the fragments. He couldn't decide if their ruined state was some cosmic joke about how his actions had led him here, how every choice he'd made had chipped away some part of him, until all that remained was this single sliver, desperately trying to hold on to what it used to be. With a heavy sigh, he turned away. He wasn't in the mood for jokes. It took a while, but with the aid of Ovette, Cal stepped out into the embers once more. The red and white clay buildings of his youth stood in ruins. Hardened rock crusted their walls, which had been outright replaced in some areas, the streets pockmarked with volcanic scars. The embers had never been beautiful, just a collection of run-down buildings that had more stain than infrastructure to them. But seeing it like this now wounded him deeper than he had expected. This was his home, destroyed and left to fend for itself. Few walked the streets, but Cal did spot a few familiar faces, folk who had tormented him for being hollowborn, spat and cursed when they'd seen him. A strange form of comfort, knowing some from his old life had survived. Those struggles didn't feel real anymore. He'd not thought about his natural-born affliction for years. Hadn't needed to. He'd forged it into a source of strength, armor that he'd worn proudly. But now he felt like an exposed nerve. Raw. Whatever relief he felt faded the moment they saw him, the moment recognition flashed across their faces. New posters flashed in the dull breeze that blew down from the volcano slopes. Placed atop the old, they urged citizens to turn in anyone suspected of rebellion. A heavy reward emphasized in bold beneath. Uprisings spread all over Eudos, Ovid offered, noticing his curiosity. For a time, it seemed like everyone wanted to fight back. Even the smaller cities without chains rallied together. Raids on Davan outposts, prefects turning on the Inquisitors, chaos everywhere. A swell of pride rose in his chest, but it dropped as he looked past Ovette and at the state of the embers. What few people he could see ambled about, chipping away at long hardened molten rock. They shuffled around in rags, looking more destitute than they ever had before. The district had once prided itself on shared hardships. The people had banded together. They'd been a district of hardy miners. But now the embers held the energy of a graveyard. But it was all too late, Ovette continued, dropping her head. Some even tried to attack the new chains, tried breaking them, like you. Cal winced. Ovette didn't have to finish. Their outcome didn't need explanation. So much death, so much wasted life. It wasn't wasted. They fought for what they believed in, just like we did. No, Cal. Ovette's voice hardened. They fought because they were scared, desperate, because they didn't have any other options. But the Davins didn't care. They didn't offer solutions, only death. They are more brutal now than they've ever been because of what we did, because of what the rebellion pushed them to do. She trailed off, turning so she didn't have to look him in the eye. Are you saying everything we went through was a waste? That it was all for nothing? Ovette wasn't to blame for how things had turned out. Cal knew that. But old habits died hard, and he needed someone to rage against. No, I'm not saying it was a waste, she replied, walking past him and continuing up the street. I'm saying we lost. They continued on in relative silence. The scant few citizens they passed by paid them no mind, too caught up in their own despair. A klaxon bellowed from somewhere far away, and the streets cleared within moments, people shutting themselves inside what remained of the buildings. It signals curfew across the city. What remains of the prefects will be patrolling the streets soon. Any caught out after dark are accused of rebellion and taken in, Ovette said, quickening her pace. We should hurry. When the orphanage came into view, whatever elation Cal had felt at the prospect of seeing Leif withered in his chest, leaving him empty and hollow. The side facing away from the volcano had survived mostly intact, albeit with several cracks spiderwebbing the walls. Up close, the real damage revealed itself. The other side of the building lay in ruins. Rubble was piled atop melted stone, hardened from years of cooling. Rooms were buried under blackened wooden frames, some clinging to their former purpose beneath layers of mottled gray ash. Ovette ignored the destruction. She passed through a hole in the wall as if it was the most normal thing to do, but Cal found it difficult to step closer. For so long, he'd held on to the hope that somehow this place had survived untouched, exactly as he remembered it. Cal, Ovette called, peering around the destroyed wall. Come on. He'll be happy to see you. Jaw clenched against the rising flood behind his eyes, Cal clambered over the debris of his childhood. The back entrance had collapsed in on itself, but he could still make out the shape of Lady Havisham's cooking station. For a moment, he swore he smelled her stew, felt the bite of her hand as she chided him for setting a bad example for the littles. The corner of his mouth curled up into a slight smile. This time he swallowed back the flood less successfully. Up here, Cal. He wiped his eyes and made his way up the winding stairs. The wood cracked beneath his weight, ash billowing with each step. How had Ovette managed this with Leif? Just inside Leif's bedroom, Ovette laid out fresh linens and a set of ragged clothing, a faded dark green tunic with large holes in the hem, and a pair of rough hewn trousers, dirty and speckled with ash. How often do you come here? The question felt stupid even before it left his lips. He didn't know what else to say. And worse, he already knew all her answers. Every day, she replied matter of factly, not breaking her attention away from her task of refolding the folded tunic. Why didn't you bring Leif to our hideout? The orphanage, it's. Can't, she swallowed, set the tunic down. He's not the same. He needs constant. Her fingers tightened on the fabric, and she let out a long, quivering breath. When she turned to look at Cal, the smile she'd reformed looked fragile, like it didn't belong next to the tears pooling in her eyes, so ready to betray the strength she was trying to project. He likes to sit on the balcony, likes to look at Sanctum Spire. Cal turned to the balcony door. Leif's frame was thin, his skin pale and taut over his bones, like parchment paper that had been scratched clean too many times. He's not the same as he was. Ovette's lip quivered. He. Cal moved toward the door, hesitated before pushing on the frayed and ash cracked wood. Each step deepened the pit in his stomach. His hand shaking, he gripped Leif's shoulder and choked at the bones that poked into his palm. He stepped around the chair. No amount of swallowing would hold back the flood this time. Leif,